Much thanks to the Greater Toronto Area Intergroup. You all have obviously put a lot of work into this. And also thanks to WSO, but this intergroup has a long history, I know, of doing really great work. And, I've been involved in projects of putting on events, and usually behind the scenes, there's a lot more going on than what seems like from the attendee perspective. And so from my perspective, having attended so far, it's gone off really seamlessly. So thank you for all your effort and your service in that way. And also thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you for showing up and being fellow travelers with me in this program. And it is one of those things where we keep showing up, we keep coming back, and to me, that's an act of courage. And so the courage that people find to keep showing up inspires courage in me. So thank you all. And so the title of the workshop is Soothing Your Inner Child in Stressful Times. So for me, this is a little bit of a stressful time, right? Preparing for this. But I've also found that one way to work with I refer to my inner kids in stressful times, is to just acknowledge that that's there. To acknowledge that a little bit of nervousness is there, and that's okay. It's okay. It's okay that whatever feelings come up, that's okay. It's okay that I'm sure this is not going to go off perfectly, and that's okay. But just acknowledging that and sometimes just speaking truth to that can actually help to bring down that stress level a little bit. So that's what I do, one of the things that I do. I can say too that I do have, a history in my sort of quote unquote real life, a history of doing some workshops and public speaking. But a lot of that was done before I came to ACA. And in doing that, I was very much kind of on autopilot when I would do it. For me, most of my life was pushing away whatever was arising within me, pushing that away, putting my head down, going on autopilot and just cruising through things and never sort of really being present to experience it. So this is, I've done some work in ACA and put myself out there a bit, but this is another step for me in that. And so my intention today is to stay internally connected with my inner kids and to my feelings, and to keep my awareness in this moment to the best that I can. And yeah, so I have a history. I was a firstborn child, and I have a history in sort of that hero thing, and I have strong addiction to the achievement stuff. And that's when I have a tendency to abandon my inner children. So situations just like this, right? So this is a practice for me, and I appreciate you all being here to support me in that and witness that as you are continuing with your growth too. So thank you. Just for a little workshop overview, what we're going to be doing today is first, one of the things that we're going to be doing is to connect to ACA reparenting as a felt experience. And so for me, I tend to be a very conceptual person, and that's also been a way that I can distance myself from feeling, right? Is just stay in my head. So yeah, I know, all the conceptually, I know this part and this is how it works, but to try to tap into a felt experience really of what we're talking about with ACA reparenting. And then to create a context to understand, based on today's topic, soothing your inner child in stressful times, try to create a context, at least, a context from my perspective of what that might mean, what it might mean to soothe an inner child in stressful times. I think also what we want to cover is to sort of examine the expanding and evolving ACA reparenting language and its basic components. So, different people are coming from different places on this, and so we'll have different levels of familiarity. But we want to cover the basic language, and to recognize that what's happening right now too in ACA literature is that we're trying to get a little bit more clarity on what reparenting is, to try to look at the language that we're using, and actually to try to expand a bit on the ACA reparenting model in ACA. So we're going to take a look at that. And then we're going to focus on a very specific tool around working with our inner child in stressful times, and that's the ACA Reparenting Check-In. So Bonnie M. did some workshops this past summer. Some of you may have attended that. And this is a very effective tool that can be used to deal with triggers in the moment. It's also an effective tool as an ongoing reparenting practice, just for reparenting in everyday life. This reparenting check-in can be a powerful tool that way. And so for those of you that attended the workshop last summer, there may be a situation maybe later on through discussion or through Q&A. I'd be curious to hear, if you did that workshop in the summer, how has that evolved for you over time? So I'd be curious with that, but we're going to be hitting that today. And, as I briefly alluded to, people are going to be here from different places with this. I did attend Charlie's workshop yesterday, and it was kind of cool to see the survey, get a sense of where people here are at with reparenting. And it's very clear to me, people are sort of in very different places with reparenting. Some this may be very new to, some have been doing this for 5, 10, 20 years. And so people here are going to be in different places, and my hope is that there's something here for everyone in what we're doing today, and that there's something that you can connect into. So just a little bit more about me. I've been in ACA for over 5 years now. And when I came, I hit a very low bottom. I was in a very rough place. But for me, when I wanted to take a look at my drinking, which is at a point in my life, which is what I needed to do, um, for me, the 12-step language came with a lot of baggage, right? Because my family was in recovery, right? In this recovery using that language, but there was still a lot of dysfunction. And so a lot of the recovery language for me initially in particular was very difficult. It was the language used in the dysfunction of my childhood. So it's been a journey for me. So I don't have experience. When I wanted to quit drinking, AA was not going to work as a fit for me. So what I'm grateful for is that I've been able to do my addictions recovery work and my trauma recovery work in ACA. And I haven't come across too many people that have sort of done things that way. But I've been able to do a lot of releasing of chemicals, addictions, not just alcohol, but a number of different things, including caffeine and nicotine. I've been able to do that sort of addictions recovery work in ACA, as well as the deeper trauma recovery work. And so that's what I came to ACA with. But I was at a very low bottom, and I was very much disabled. I was in a very disabled state when I came to ACA and in a lot of pain. And when I came to ACA, when I heard that the solution was to become your own loving parent, that was not something that resonated well with me, right? It didn't, and when I learned a little bit more about it, it quite honestly just seemed kind of weird to me. I was like, this is weird, this inner child. And so I had a lot of resistance to reparenting. And, I think what I've come to understand too is that reparenting really involves a lot of self-care. And in general, I had resistance to self-care. Right. And when I heard that my job was to become my own loving parent, for me, it was, well, so now I have to clean up the mess that my parents didn't do. Yeah, I mean, it was just, I had a lot of resistance to it until I ultimately sort of came to find that it's like, this mess that my parents created is me, right? This is my life. That's the mess that's in front of me right now. And it's going to be my job to move forward in ways that I'm going to find healthier ways to live and to heal the wounds that I need to heal. And so reparenting for me has been the process of doing that. And so I've, done step work. I've gone through the yellow workbook 3 times. I've done it through small work group formats, 5 or 6 people, taking about a year or so to go through it very intensively. I've done that 3 times. So I've done the intensive step work that way. I've done the step workbook. I'm on my 2nd time through that currently. But I also came to appreciate chapter 8 in the Big Red Book, which is the reparenting chapter. And I came to a place of seeing those exercises and just giving them a try. It was a very slow process and I had a lot of resistance to it. But what I've come to experience is that reparenting actually has become my central recovery practice, right? More than anything else. Reparenting is what I think is the root of my healing. So in some ways, a lot of the things I do in ACA, step work, and these are the things that I do in ACA. Reparenting for me is more, how do I do it? And I do it with gentleness, humor, love, and respect. And so there are things that I do in reparenting, tools too. But for me, reparenting is about how I do it. Gentleness, humor, love, and respect. And that's been a learning process for me. So my focus right now on service, we talked about, it was in the introduction. I don't want to go too much in depth with that, but yeah, my focus has been with beginners. And for me, the sponsor model isn't something that fit well for me. The authority issues were a barrier for that for me. And so I found other ways to connect with people deeply. To me, the healing is really about building trust and connecting with other people and finding ways to do that. And different things are going to work for different people, right? So with that not working for me, I've been really intent on what are some other ways that we can support newcomers who really need that intensive support. What are other ways that we can do that if not using a sponsorship model? So the Beginner's Handbook has been a piece of that, to create beginners meetings and materials for people to come in and connect and have materials specifically supporting beginners coming in. And so that has been a journey for me, and writing that has been a beautiful journey for me, and I've really appreciated that. We started the beginners meeting here in Gulfport in Florida, and developed the materials to support that. But then we created another. The big meeting is Sunday, is actually in about 2 hours from now, where I'll be heading. We have a Sunday noon meeting Eastern time, and we get about 150 people a week who are attending that each week. So it's been well received. The handbook is available for download. It's been downloaded over 6,000 times actually in the last 9 months or so. And it's available in the best practices on the ACA WSO website also. And a lot of people are just sharing it. It's a PDF and it's free. And so people share it with email on social media. So that has been a passion of mine. The getting started project that I've been working on. I've been the lead writer on the Reparenting chapters for that. And then that in coordination with Bonnie, who's been working on the Loving Parent Guidebook, we wanted to make sure there was synergy in some of the new materials that are coming out. So I did a very deep dive on the reparenting materials in our existing literature and really sort of examining what it is that they have to say. And so that's been my passion. That's been my work in service, is really around beginners and reparenting. So, and that's where we're at. That's sort of the overview about me. And probably a little personal anecdotes will pop up along the way as we keep moving forward. I will say a little bit more too, that as an adult child in my life, I really lived in dissociation most of my life. I literally lived, and chemicals boosted that, but I sort of lived in a sort of in my head, sort of disconnected from my body state most of my life. That's what I've really come to understand. I lived in a dissociated state, checked out, lost on thought, autopilot, living in my head. There's different ways that I can talk about it, right? So my antidote to dissociation has really been mindfulness. It's been a practice of sort of staying present. And there's different words around mindfulness and meditation. But it's about bringing attention to my senses in the present moment and sort of being able to stay with myself embodied, right? That's been my antidote to dissociation. And what I'm discovering is that attention that I can bring is the greatest gift that I have to give, both to others and to myself, to my inner kids. Bringing that attention is probably the greatest gift that I have to give. So I'm going to say during this workshop, I'm going to ask that you please pay attention to and acknowledge what's going on inside of you. And so I'll invite you to join in some of these exercises that we're going to be doing, and there's a few opportunities for sharing, but I also encourage you to take care of yourself and opt out of anything for any reason if it's not comfortable for you. So please pay attention to that. And so as part of my welcome, I also want to acknowledge that my inner kids are here with me also, right? I bring them with me. And so they want to say hi to you. And so I'm going to allow them to say hi here. And so these are the faces to my feelings and needs, right? So photos for me have been an incredibly important way to connect to my younger selves. And these are some of my younger selves. These are allowing these photos to connect with these photos, allow me to tap into what it was that I wasn't allowed to feel, what I wasn't able to feel back then. And there's a whole range, right? In all of these different ages. So with reparenting, we come to understand reparenting in different ways, and we have nuanced language that differs, right? We have different understandings of this inner family or inner landscape that exists within each of us. These are parts of my younger self, and they're here with me today, right? So I want to acknowledge that, and they want to say hi to you, and invite you to maybe bring some of your inner kids to this exercise too, and be here today. So we are going to move into an exercise, and I'm going to ask that we start by just sort of settling in and bringing attention to ourselves, right? In whatever way we do that, to bring attention in this current moment as much as possible. And I'm going to invite you to do an exercise that can symbolize the felt experience of reparenting in the ACA program. And some of you may remember this exercise if you attended a reparenting workshop last summer. It may be familiar to you, but it's a powerful exercise, has been for me. So as we do this, you can close your eyes if you like, or you can leave them open with a soft gaze, whichever you prefer, and just take a few deep breaths on your own. And we'll start by taking one of our hands and making a fist. Okay. And the job of this hand is to stay closed. And the job of this hand is to protect. And so when this hand stays closed as a fist, we might say, yeah, good job. It makes sense. It makes sense that you're doing this. This is your job. It makes sense. Right? So just take a moment to notice your fist and what that fist feels like. Just take a moment to notice that. And now using your other hand, try to pry open that fist. But remember that the job of this clenched fist is to stay closed. So just go ahead and do this. Try to pry it open and notice how that feels as you try to pry open that fist. Okay. And so now just pause and let that settle. Maybe take a breath, another deep breath if you like. Okay, so now take that same hand that you used to make the fist and make a fist again. Okay. But this time, instead of trying to pry open the fist, just gently place your other hand under your fist as if to cradle it. As if to say, it makes sense why you're doing this. I get it. It's protection and safety. This is your job. I get that. And then just relax your fist as you cradle it with the other hand and notice what that feels like. And so that's what we're doing in ACA Reparenting. Parts of us don't want to open up yet. And most of our lives, their job has been to resist and to stay closed. And when these parts don't want to open up, we bring gentleness. And we tell those parts, I get it. You will open up when you're ready to open. And when you're ready, I will be there. Feel free to open your eyes, to settle in again, to come back to the present moment. And now I'd like to hear from a few of you. And what was the difference you noticed between trying to pry open a fist and cradling the fist? And so maybe just 3 or 4 people. We don't have a whole lot of time, but maybe 3 or 4 people, maybe lead up to a minute or so. Just share what that experience was, the difference you noticed between trying to pry open a fist and cradle the fist. And just to say, unlike a regular meeting, I may add a little bit to whatever it is you comment on if I think there's something I can add that might be of benefit to others, just to be aware of that. So we're going to keep moving forward. Thanks everyone for participating, and thank you for not participating if it was something you wanted to opt out to. So we're going to move, do a screen share here. We're going to continue to move forward with this. And make sure, see if I can do this right. So everyone should be seeing a PowerPoint presentation at this point. Great, thank you. So I'm going to talk just a little bit. So ACA reparenting, there's a context, and the reparenting that we're doing has roots, right? This is not something that just sort of came out of nowhere. There's a history around this. And part of that is to acknowledge that the concept that we're using around reparenting, this language and these different parts of us, is called multiplicity. That's what some people call it. There's different parts or aspects of us. And there's been ways to look at around really pathologizing this. And so there can be a lot of fear around the idea of, different parts of me and stuff, but it can really be just as simple as like going out to dinner. It's like, well, what do I want to eat? And well, a part of me wants some Chinese, a part of me wants pizza, right? So I have aspects of myself that really aren't in agreement, right? And it's just the idea that sometimes it's easier to work with these different aspects of myself if I sort of understand them as distinct parts within me. Right. So we'll look at that a little bit more closely moving forward, but this is not something that's new. Right. And so, for example, just in the arena of psychology, Freud had the id, the ego, and the superego, and these parts were interacting with each other, in tension with each other at some times. Transactional analysis is another one, and their language actually is very similar to the reparenting language that we use. So they use parent, child, adult, and even modern trauma theory. With internal family systems today, the IFS systems is based on parts. And actually, before I go forward, I just want to also say, you're going to get copies of these slides, you're going to get copies of the information. So I'd encourage you not to get too caught up. I'm a note taker a lot of times, but not to get too caught up in what can be distracting of taking notes. If there's something of value and you want to write that down, I really encourage you to do that, but you'll get all of this information. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. So in this idea that there's these different parts, what I've come to understand, my approach to it, and I think ACA's approach to it, is basically all parts of myself, all these aspects of myself with different feelings and needs need to be welcome, right? I need welcome to the extent that I need to acknowledge, at the very least, acknowledge that they're there and not push them away. So I need to reject no part of myself. Whatever arises, the feelings and needs represented by these parts, no part of me is something that I should reject. And it really is about internal conflict or tension. And so when we're looking at that fist, that sort of represents a tension, right? A tension or a conflict within us versus, the internal harmony that can happen, that sense of relaxation that can happen when we get to a healing place with it, right? And so for me, when I was talking about that bottom that I hit, I'd been holding myself in that fist type way, that tension for so long. And it's exhausting, right? It's so exhausting to live life from that tense place. And so, I would hit a bottom in my life from the tension. I'd hit exhaustion, and I'd be like, okay, well, I need to kind of get back up on that horse again and figure out a way. And I would build, that tension would build. And I just, for me, got to a place where the exhaustion just was, I was not going to be able to do things in the way that I used to do them. The exhaustion was complete enough that I hit a low enough bottom that I had to fundamentally change what it was that I was doing in my life. So I've come to understand reparenting as a practice, right? And the idea is that the pain that is associated with that tension, that pain can be something that wakes me up, right? It's something that I can pay attention to, and it makes me more aware and changes that happen in my life. Or that pain can be something that's numbing, and it can put me to sleep, and it can take me to that place of dissociation, right? So what I do with that discomfort or that pain is really, I can do different things with it, right? And those different things, I'm going to experience it differently. So as adult children, for me as an adult child, I learned to avoid that pain because really there was no other option in my childhood. I didn't have parents that were attuned to me to help me understand, well, when these feelings and needs arise, this is what I do. This is how I work with them, and I can come to bring a resolution with them and how I manage them. I did not have consistent parenting in that way as a child. And that's probably what most adult children experience, is sort of a lack of that. And so what did I do with that pain when it arose? Because I didn't know how to bring resolution to it. I pushed that away, and I numbed, I distracted, I dissociated, I checked out. I lived in my head because the body part where I felt it was really too painful. And so for me, one way to look at reparenting is it's about learning to be with discomfort to some degree. And I can't do it in an overwhelming way, though, because that's just re-traumatizing. So there's this sort of incremental approach of learning to be with some discomfort, allowing that to arise so that I can work with it, arise in a way that to the degree possible that it's manageable for me to work with, right? So in this sense, learning to actually sit with what I've been running away from my whole life is an act of courage. And I would love for our program to sort of highlight that more, that there's so much courage in what it is that we do. And it's there. It's in our literature, it's in what we do, in the promises. It's acknowledging that the courage it takes to be able to do this work. And so doing this work, other ways to look at it. So doing this work, for me, in a sense, is a process of detoxing, right? So there's the external influences in my life, the chemicals and stuff. And I was on benzodiazepine anti-tranquilizers. I was on antidepressants. So even with all of that, those are no longer in my life at this point. So alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, sugar, carbohydrates, these things that I can, from the outside, do. And it's had to be a very slow process to remove all these from my life. Too fast, and I'm going to run into problems, right? But it's been a slow, incremental process of detoxing, in a sense. But we also think about that in the sense of the internal drugstore, right? The internal drugs we reach for, all the behavioral and process addictions, the way that we soothe ourselves by numbing out behaviorally, right? It's detoxing from those process addictions too. At the same time, it's also a strength training exercise, right? So we have this loving parent aspect within us, and we want to awaken that, and we want to strengthen it. So as I go to the gym, for example, and I do exercises, or if I run, I'm strength training. So in a sense, reparenting is strength training, right? It's learning to do things differently. It's creating new patterns in our life. We see those patterns, and we learn that those patterns can change, right? So that's the strength training aspect of reparenting. I'll also talk about, I think of reparenting as a process of desensitization and resensitization, right? So desensitization is desensitizing to the triggers in my life, all of those things that come across my life that create this reflexive reaction in me, right? And for me, a trigger is something that happens in my daily life today, but it hooks into something that happened a very long time ago, right? And I have to desensitize to that over time, right? At the same time, it's a resensitization process. I'm resensitizing to allowing those emotions to actually come up. Fear that I pushed away all my life, anger that I pushed away my whole life, sadness that I pushed away my whole life. I'm slowly allowing that to arise in me, right? And I'm resensitizing to all of those emotions, right? And so for me, reparenting is the process of rebuilding trust. So we talk about the rules of family dysfunction: don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, right? So reparenting is about feeling. It's about talking to other people, or just even within myself, talking about it. But it's also that process of rebuilding trust. And it's rebuilding an internal trust between these different aspects of myself. And through that, hand in hand goes a new way of trusting what's happening with other people and what's going on with other people and around me and the rest of the world. So it's an internal trust and an external trust. And so when we go back to the title of this, working with the inner child in stressful times, what I want to say is that, yes, the stressful times may be in a moment, right, when a trigger arises. So part of working with stressful times is the long-term work that I do. It's the homework that I do in reparenting that allows me to work with these stressful times when they arise in very different ways. And so to do this, we want to find ways to consistently, I have tried to find ways to consistently practice with the things that are not the big things, right? I get stuck in traffic and, oh gosh, something can come up, or I get cut off, right? The road rage thing, right? Or, the different things that arise. I order something in a restaurant and it didn't come out the right way. It's not the end of the world, but something can arise in me, and it's not the overwhelming piece that feels like I can't manage it, but that's the strength training opportunities of learning to, oh, what happened? What's arising in me? How can I work with this differently? Paying attention to it. So practicing with the small things can really help us in the stressful times. ACA reparenting language. So this is the base ACA reparenting language. And just to acknowledge, I'm a little bit behind schedule of where I'm wanting to be, so I'm going to move a little more quickly than I was planning to on here. So just want to acknowledge that. So the base ACA reparenting language, there's essentially three parts. There's the critical parent, there's the loving parent, and there's the inner child. And we've probably heard these terms, if we've been around ACA, we've heard these terms and we might be familiar with them. But to acknowledge that whatever is going on inside of us, these terms are representing, right? The terms is a common language that we use to communicate with each other. But what's happening underneath us, what's happening on the inside, is a very personalized experience. We all have our own inner landscapes, our own inner worlds, our own understanding of what's going on exactly inside of us. These are just words to try to represent that so that I can use that to create a better understanding of what's going on inside of me and to be able to communicate that with other people, other fellow travelers in the ACA program. Okay? So inner child, for example, can represent many different things to many people. And we'll take a closer look at that. So first, taking a look at the inner critical parent. And again, just through lit review, this is sort of picking out some of the common themes that we see in our literature of how it's talking about the critical parent. And some are a little bit more of sort of my Lewis B. Nuanced influences or whatever that I sort of bring in, my own perspective. So one thing that we say about the critical parent is that it arose in childhood, right? And one thing I think that's important to recognize is that the critical parent can be something that mirrors our actual experience of what was said. So some of us grew up in incredibly verbally abusive homes. And so those messages can be something that were very much there and present. From my experience, for example, I was the hero child, and I was actually praised oftentimes. I was told how gifted I am, right? And so, but that also sort of set an example for me of a bar that was constantly raised, right? That constantly raising bar. You have all these gifts and you're underachieving, Lewis, right? And so there's a subtle criticism that's in that. So the critic can come across both through overt experiences that we had in childhood, but also through experiences like withholding praise. And so in the absence of unconditional love, I had love in my family, but oftentimes it came across as conditional approval. But in the absence of that consistent unconditional love, that the critic is what rises in place of that. And that's what kids kind of naturally do. It can happen, right? So for some, it can be a very explicit voice. And sometimes I hear, like, for me, the word is loser, such a loser, right? And I can almost hear it inside of me. But it can also sort of be masked, because we can also say how sometimes the voice of the inner critic is masked because it sounds like my own voice, right? It's just me, right? But that's a critic aspect of me, right? A critical aspect of me. So for some, there's a voice quality to it. For some, it's a feeling, right? It's just a sense in my body. I know this critic is activated. I don't hear any words necessarily or messages, but I can just, in my body, I know that it's inside of me. I know that part of me is active right now. For some, it's imagery. It's sort of the idea of, I've heard, floating out in space and, sort of no one's there, and the messages, or a darkness that can happen. I mean, it's different things for different people, but it's not just that voice quality for everyone. It can be very subtle, sort of coming across as doubt or worry even, or I'm trying to just be helpful, right? I'm just trying to look out for you, so I just need you to make sure that you know you're not good enough, right? There's sort of like a twisted quality that can come in. But for me, it's doubt, and I think for a lot of people, it's doubt. It's not, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm somehow broken more than everyone else. It finds fault in our actions, our thoughts, our feelings, just everything. Whether I do it, I think it, or I feel it, nothing's right. That critic is what's driving that. It can be inward, pointed as shame, right? Something towards me as shame. And that critic is directed at me. It's directed, really, I've come to understand it, at my inner kids. But I can also direct that energy outward towards blame, right? You're stupid. You're not doing it right. Why aren't you doing it right? That critic can be inwardly directed. And I think oftentimes I outwardly direct it because I don't want it inwardly directed at me anymore. Like, the shame is too much. So then I go to blame. So it's the voice of shame and blame. Control, judgment, all or nothing thinking, and perfection. Right. So this is Big Red Book Chapter 2. And we talk about Big Red Book Chapter 8 as a reparenting chapter, but I really also see Big Red Book Chapter 2 as a great resource for understanding how the critic works. Right. And for me, control, and this is what Big Red Book Chapter 2 says: control, judgment, all or nothing, and perfection. These are the tactics of the inner critic. Right. And so when I see these thinking patterns in myself, that helps me identify too, oh, that's the critic. If I'm thinking in all or nothing ways, this is the best thing in the world, or this is the worst thing in the world, I can't possibly be in that critic space if I can't see that gray, nuanced area. And so, in connection with the steps, and step 1 in particular, the critic is often associated with the powerlessness and the unmanageability, right? I am powerless over the critic arising in me, right? And it creates a sense of unmanageability as I try to deal with that, right? But we can find that we can work with the critical parent in different ways that aren't necessarily in that way. The inner loving parent. So our Big Red Book and our literature says everyone has this within them and can connect to it. And I've really come to believe that. I had doubts when I came into the program that I had this part in me that sort of could know what to do, and unconditional love. I had a lot of doubts and whatever. But as I do this work and I see in other people and myself, in the same way that I can instinctively sort of bring a cradle in that exercise, I bring that cradle to the interaction that is within me. That cradling ability is within me somewhere, right? It's within me. So that's one thing our program says. Everyone has this. And the purpose of the loving parent is to provide unconditional love we didn't receive as kids, right? It's sort of that redo, right? We can't change the past, but we can change our experience of the past today. And to understand that our childhood wounding was not our fault. We were simply kids, right? We were not the ones in charge, and it was not our fault. The dysfunction was not our fault, right? And so for me, a core message of the loving parent, and this is, again, Big Red Book Chapter 8, there's all those affirmations. Most of them start with, it's okay, right? So to me, that's a base language of the loving parent. It's okay. It's okay to feel. It's okay to trust. It's okay to have needs. It's okay not to know what's going on. It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to set a boundary. It's okay to say no. That's the loving parent. So the literature also talks about, and I agree, the loving parent must be present for the inner child to emerge. If that critic is running the show, that inner kid is not going to come out, right? It went into hiding when it was dangerous as a kid. If it's still dangerous inside of me because that critic is running the show, the inner child is still not going to come out. It's not going to be safe. So one of the first tasks in reparenting for the loving parent is to begin to set limits or boundaries with the critical parent, right? No. When that energy arises, we're just not going to go that direction right now. We're just not going to do that. And to start setting boundaries. And that is the first task, in my experience, the first task of a loving parent. That's the initial awakening and the initial strengthening of a loving parent, is to start setting boundaries with that internal harshness within ourselves. And that was the beginning part for me, and it seems to be a beginning part for a lot of people. So the new literature anyway is saying that the core parts of the loving parent are to nurture, to protect, and to guide the inner child. Inner child in our literature is talked about in very complex ways, and it's a complex topic, and I'm not going to be able to cover it all here. But one idea is that within in our family dysfunction, an inner child went into hiding. And so again, for me, the inner child is represented as putting faces to feelings and needs in a reparenting context, right? And you saw those photos that I had. To be able to put those photos of my younger selves on the face of my feelings and needs, that is the reparenting practice. So when we say my inner child went into hiding, my feelings and my needs were shoved away, our stuffed emotions, right? It's a synonymous language. The inner child holds the truth of our childhood. In step 4, we talk about the goal being a full remembrance. And let's be clear, we don't want that full remembrance to happen all at once. That would be too much. So it's an evolving full remembrance that can happen. But the inner child holds the truth, not just the memory truth, the cognitive memory truth, but the emotional memory truth of what happened. Talk about the inner child being a connection to our true self or to our higher powers, right? That for me, my inner child, aspects of my inner child can represent awe and wonder and curiosity, things that are bigger than me, right? Larger than me. And the inner child can become our new inner compass, right? Our intuition. We kind of talk about the inner child as our intuition, in a sense, an inner compass. When I can listen to that, there's a knowing that can happen. And again, this inner child can represent myriad parts, right? And so for some people, we talk about a single inner child, and we just sort of work with a single inner child, and it represents a lot of these different things. For some people, it's inner children, right? I have inner children aspects of me. It can be one inner child at different ages, and thinking it's different for different people. There's no one right way, right? So everyone will connect into and discover that what that is for themselves. But really, the core of it is to give myself the love that I seek. And that's when I say I give myself the love that I seek, it's a loving parent within me giving my inner children the love that they need and didn't get when I was young, and that they still need today. Right? So this next part is not something that is in our current literature a lot, and it's something that's being introduced in some of the new literature, and it was reintroduced in the reparenting check-in that we're going to be doing today. So the inner teen, the inner teenager. So just to be clear, this inner teenager may not reflect you as your actual teenage years, right? So again, we have our actual experience, our developmental childhood experience, right? But this is a language, remember, too. It's a language for common communication and symbolism also. So it can be confusing in that way. But so, for example, I'm gay. And when I was a kid, 11, 12, 13 years old coming out, I had a very contracted, terrified part of me. I was living in Iowa. It was at the burgeoning of the AIDS epidemic. I heard gay plague. There was nothing positive on TV. I felt completely alone and terrified, and that was a teenage experience for me. At the same time, I didn't see any models of what love might be for me. I didn't see anything like that. I had no sense that down the road somewhere, I was going to find a special someone. And so there's a sadness. I carried a great sadness in my teenage years, right? And then there was also the times where my parents ultimately got divorced, and it was that sort of get to that place of just F it, right? Whatever, I don't care. And that's sort of me moving into sort of the substance abuse areas and stuff like that. I was also a hero child. I played football and dated the cheerleaders, right? So there's that hero performance over responsibility, overachieving part. These are all true for my teenage years. For the purpose of reparenting and the way that we've come to understand it in a way that we have a common language, it's really the aspect of ourselves that are protecting the vulnerability within us. So the job of the inner teenager is to protect the inner child. That's the job of the teenager. It's protection, right? So in this, we don't want, the teenager part of us doesn't want us to feel any of those vulnerable feelings, those tender feelings. That makes things more difficult, right? So it tries to control things. The teenager is a part of us that tries to control things and make sure that these feelings, these inner kids, aren't going to come out and cause too much problems and discomfort. They can take on, this teenager can take on aspects of a critical parent, right? What was our modeling in childhood, right? So as we were coming into adulthood, what is it that we grabbed, right? The critical aspect. So the teenager part can be a critical part and reflect some of that critical parent. The teenager is oftentimes highly reactive, right? So part of the teenage years is identity, informing identity. And when that part of me is not feeling seen or heard, that can result in a lot of anger arising. And that's sort of really emblematic of the ACA teenager, is anger, frustration, resentment, and opposite laundry list traits, right? So it's not completely delineated between regular laundry list and opposite, but a lot of those opposite laundry list traits I've come to associate with my teen, that becoming the authority figure that other people are afraid of. And like I said, the acting out behaviors. The last resort. So there's a part of me that's sort of like, I got this, the teenager control, performance, I got this. And then the crumbling, it just falls apart, right? And when it falls apart, it's like, whatever, screw this. And I'm going to go to do something just to make myself feel better. And it can be those compulsions and addictions. So a lot of that's associated with the teenager. But this is a newer part of our program. It's still unfolding, and everyone's going to experience it differently. There's no way we can go over all these, right? But these are different tools and techniques for reparenting within ACA. And a lot of these are in Big Red Book Chapter 8 at some degree, and a lot of these are further development that's coming out around the techniques and the Loving Parent Guidebook and getting started. And so one that we have is the Reparenting Check-In, right? And so that's what we're going to focus on today. So different things I've done the mirror work. That was powerful for me. The childhood photos, like I said before, I go there and it just allows me to connect into that vulnerability. Today, we're going to work on the reparenting check-in as far as that soothing an inner child in troubled times or in stressful times. And I'm going to actually have to pass over some of the workshop that we're going to do. We're going to do a body scan exercise. We're not going to have time for that today. My timing's a little off, and that's okay, right? It's okay. My timing's a little off. So, but doing a body scan can help us anchor into that. And so it's sort of a meditative process. You can find recordings online, scripts online, YouTube videos. A lot of them start from the feet and go up to the head. I actually prefer, as a grounding exercise, to start from the head and go down to the feet. And that helps me sort of ground and then reconnect with parts of myself. But different things, work better for different people. But by going, you focus on the top of your head, you focus on your eyes, it brings attention into that moment, which allows us to begin a reparenting process. And the first step in the reparenting check-in really is a check-in in that way. So I had that here. I was hoping we'd experience it, but we're not going to be able to do that today. So I'm going to skip over. So we're going to go right into reparenting check-in at this point. And we talked a little bit about it, but the rationale for this reparenting check-in, I'm going to move this over a little bit. There we go. The rationale for the reparenting check-in is that, again, for most of our lives as adult children, the critical parent has been in charge, right? The critical parent is the one by default that's running the show, that's taking the lead in life, right? And while this is happening, it can trigger the inner children and the teen in different ways, but both those younger parts of myself will get triggered by that critical parent. And that's what creates that conflict and that tension and the fist-like quality, right? That dynamic that I've been living with my whole life. Okay. So again, the inner critic may be overt and harsh. Some people are very aware of their inner critic. Other people say, I don't think I even have an inner critic. But that inner critic can also be very, very subtle, right? In a helping, so I'm just trying to help, right? It's in the same way that I can do that caretaking sort of thing with other people, but have a judgment quality with it. My inner critic can do that also. And like we said too, we are powerless over the critic arising. Those reactions that we have, we're powerless over that arising, but we're not powerless with the ways that we work with that critic. And again, initially particular with reparenting, it's learning to set boundaries with that critic. Now, I had a very contentious relationship with my inner critic when I came into this program. I mean, it was like doing battle. This was the part of me that I felt like was my abuser my whole life, right? And so the goal, and we will talk about the goal with working with the critic, and we're not going to get in depth with how we work with the critic today. The goal is to allow that part to be also, to not reject that critic part of ourselves, but to find a new role for it and to find a less contentious relationship with the critic. But that's something that can take a lot of work over time. And it's been something that's evolved for me. So for me, it was just get the hell away from me, right? And that was where I needed to start. Over time, it became a more of a neutral thing, just sort of setting a balanced no. And there's times where I can see the positive intention. The intention of the critic was to make sure that I wasn't going to get hurt anymore. And in that process, it was hurting me, right? But it didn't know that. So the understanding and the relationships with the critic is something that's going to evolve over time. But the idea in reparenting, and specifically with this reparenting check-in, is that we want the inner loving parent to take the lead in our lives, right? And to tend to the younger parts of ourselves who needed the attention back then and didn't get it, who needed that attunement and that connection and that nurturing and protection and guidance and didn't get it, and that are still active in me, that need that healing today and need to be a part of my life, to safely be a part of my life today. The loving parent needs to be the one that sort of steps into that role. So that's the rationale for doing this. It's working with triggers, but again, the reparenting check-in, an opportunity when a trigger arises that I can go through this process, but it's also something I practice in everyday life. I just find myself doing it 3, 4, 5 times a day. It just sort of naturally is coming and it becomes a practice. And again, the more we practice it, the easier it gets. So 4 parts to this reparenting check-in. Step 1, or part 1, ground your attention. So again, we're going to be doing that meditative exercise and sort of doing it and using the senses. You know, it's a body scan, or sometimes if I'm really triggered, it's, you know, what 5 things can I see? What 4 things can I hear? What 2 things can I, to go through a process of invoking those senses brings me back into the moment, because I have to be in the moment to be able to work with my parts. If I'm just completely dissociated, I'm abandoning myself again. And I needed to do that, right? But as part of this practice, we slowly want to learn to sit with that discomfort. So to ground my attention into my body. Part 2, who in me is triggered? And by who, we mean which younger part of me is triggered, right? Is it an inner child? Is it a teenager? What was the trigger? What is it that provoked that response in me? And then what can I do to tend to that part, right? What can I do to soothe? What can I do to parent myself in that situation? So looking at each of these, again, grounding our attention. Breathing to me is essential. A conscious breath for myself can be a huge gift, right? It can be a huge gift to myself, to my inner kids. Just a breath can help bring that consciousness in, and that physical awareness of the body. My holding tension. For me, my shoulders are always up here, right? And actually right now they're a little high. I need to drop my shoulders. When I get a little bit worked up, that addiction to excitement kicks in and that tension comes. I'm sort of in that fist area, to pay attention to when that is going on in my body, to be aware of that. And where in my body? For me, I feel a burning sensation in my abdomen or my stomach. That's anger, right? Fear comes up in different areas. So there's different correlates, and it's different for different people. If I start paying attention to my body instead of trying to push it away, there's messages there that are really valuable for me, right, of what's going on. And then emotional awareness. And I didn't know emotions. I didn't know needs. And so I've used nonviolent communication as another technique as far as exploring those things. But our program, I think, is there's practices of connecting with emotions in the steps. And I think this is going to be something through reparenting practice that will get a little bit more robust in how it is that we approach this, really learning to identify feelings and needs, and being able to label that, and understanding that the feelings are the messages to know what it is that I need, right? So I have to have a language around that. So the emotional awareness, so ground your attention. What is a one word emotion that I can identify of what I'm feeling right now? Maybe I'm just terrified, right? Or maybe a trigger happened and I'm really, really sad all of a sudden. This first step is ground my attention and identify a feeling word, right? That's part 1. Part 2, what part of me is triggered? right? And again, it can be this inner world that we have can be a very complex sort of place, right? And very robust with lots of understanding. But oftentimes it starts much simpler than that. And it can start with just an inner child aspect, or you can bring in the teenager. But what part of me is triggered? The vulnerable inner child in this framework of language that we seem to be moving towards in ACA. Inner child: fear, shame, sadness, embarrassment, contraction. Contraction is sort of that inner child response, versus a teenager: anger, resentment, frustration, inflation, right? So contraction or inflation, that's how I've come to understand it. What part of me is triggered? And sometimes, quite honestly, I can just ask when I'm feeling triggered, something's going on in response. I ask, how old is this part of me? How old do I feel right now? And it can be a very clear clue. And it can be actually a great clue to actually tie me into a seminal memory that I need to work with, right? So again, in a moment, I may be triggered by something that's going on in the world right now. And there's plenty going on in the world right now. I might be triggered by family stuff. And let's be clear, like there's a lot of family stuff coming up in the next few months, right? These are times of stress, right? So, but it's something that's happening in the present moment connected to something that happened back then. So if I can get a little bit of clue on what part of me is triggered, what part of me back then got triggered, that can be helpful. On the other hand, we don't need to get too caught up on it. If I can't identify who part of me is triggered, then I can move to the next step. What was the trigger? And this can be tricky sometimes, because sometimes I'll just have a response in my body and I have no clue what it was that got me going, right? I just have sort of no clue with that. But oftentimes it's something external, something, a person, a place, or a thing, a event, something someone said, a smell sometimes that reminded me of something. There's something external that happened. But it may be too, maybe there's something internal that happened. Maybe my critic got provoked with something. And oftentimes for me, it's a combination, right? Something happened in the outside world, I had a response, and my critic comes on to shame me about it, right? So it can be a snowballing effect. But what was the trigger? Again, that can be something that's useful information. Well, this is something that might trigger me again in the future, and I can be a little bit more aware. This is a situation that I can anticipate something's going to be happening. I can learn about that with myself. And then tending to my part. How present is this part? How present is my loving parent in the moment? And let's be clear, if I'm not in a space where I can provide that cradle, then it's not going to be a lot of use bringing my critic to my inner kids to try to soothe them. And so I may need to reach out for help at that point. It may not be something that I can do internally. There may be things that I can do to invoke my loving parents, sometimes music or different things that can help people strengthen their loving parent to do this work in the moment. But it may not be something we can do in the moment. But we want to bring our loving parent to this part of tending to the part of us that needs the attention. And so with a teenager, and different things are going to work for different people again. But the teenager, it's empathizing, it's validating, it's reassuring. I see you, I feel you. Again, that identity stuff. They want to be seen, they want to be heard. I get that you're feeling angry. It's that validation for a teenager. Seems to be what that part of me likes to hear. And then for the inner child, it's oftentimes a little more gentle. It's that it's okay piece. Empathy, nurturing, reassurance. It's okay. You're enough. I love you. There's a tender quality to it. But there's things that parts of me need, and it may be physical things that I may need a cup of tea to help soothe me. Sometimes I just have to go and take a shower. Sometimes that is something that I need to physically do. I need to stretch myself. And how it is to tend, you think of a new parent with a newborn that really has no clue what they're doing, right? And so, and I don't have kids. I've had to study parenting materials and how this works, but it can take some time to figure out what these parts need, and you have to try different things. So, but the step 4 is tending to this part and doing what I need to do to get there. So we're going to go ahead and try that right now. Make a quick exercise out of this because we're running out of time. But we can do it. It's okay. So the reparenting check-in. Okay. So again, I'm going to invite you to make yourself comfortable to the degree that you can here. Make yourself comfortable. And that was a lot of information, so let's acknowledge that, right? Sort of a heady spot to be. So we're going to try to drop down a little bit and release that and just focus on the present moment. You can close your eyes, you can keep them open, whichever you prefer. And let's take several long, slow, deep breaths, breathing in fully and exhaling slowly. Just a few deep breaths that we can give ourselves. So the title of this workshop is Soothing Your Inner Child in Stressful Times. By stressful times, we might be referring to situations with family or difficulties at work or conflict in relationships. Again, right now, we might be also talking about a virus, a global pandemic, volatile elections, social unrest, economic scarcity feelings. There's a lot going on right now that might be stressful times, right? And a stressful time might be just presenting a workshop and knowing I need to deal with that, right? So it's going to be different for different people, stressful times. So take a moment to what's going on for you in the context of what's going on in the world right now. And when you think about what's happening in the world and all the different ways it touches your life, allow yourself to focus in on one scenario that feels difficult for you. Maybe unsettling, right? Or stressful. Something that's causing you stress. Just take a moment to focus in on that. And just notice what your breathing is like as you come into your body. Notice what your breathing is like without changing it. It might be choppy or tight or shallow. It might be deep. What's your breathing like? To focus on your breathing right now as you think about that event that you're focusing on. What's your breathing like? Tensions in your body, maybe. What's going on there? What sensations in your body let you know that there's a feeling there? And what is that feeling? Or feelings that are coming up? Maybe you feel tingling or warmth or heaviness in different areas of your body. And again, you might briefly scan your body to see what messages are there for you. To identify the emotions that you're feeling right now. And then we move into trying to understand what part of this is you. Is it the young inner child? Feelings of sadness or hurt or fear, vulnerability? Or maybe it's a teenager. Feelings of anger or frustration, resentment. Some way of being very reactive to what's going on. It might help to ask, how old do I feel? How old does this part feel to me? And then you can reflect to better understand what triggered this part of you. Was it something related to that situation that you were focusing on? Maybe the inner critic became activated. It's causing some additional discomfort or stress or feelings. Maybe some worry or some doubt, that critic being active. And then what can you do to tend to this part right now, in this moment? Attend to that part that's feeling unsettled. It could be a physical touch, like a hand on your arm or on your chest, on your heart. Maybe you can take a deep breath. That can be a gift to that part of you to release something there. Maybe it's empathy or validation or reassurance. Maybe saying something, I'm listening. I feel you. You're not alone. I am here with you. I am here with you. And whatever you're feeling, it's okay. It's okay. Like that cradle. So just take another moment and give yourself whatever attention it is to whatever you need to tend to that part of yourself. And I invite you to open your eyes and lift your gaze. Come back to the moment. And maybe just from one or two people, if we could just do a very brief share, a 1 minute share on what that experience was like for you. I think we're a minute over already. So just want to close this out. I won't even go to the PowerPoint, but just by saying there's a lot of different messages that we can use. And I was going to put a screen up on all the different things that we can say. Sometimes I feel like when I go to that place and the stuff comes up, I don't even know what to say, right? So that will be in the PowerPoint slide. There's all kinds of messages. There's going to be some resources. The Reparenting check-in, there's two different, there's a worksheet, there's a summary, there's going to be links available. You're going to get all of this information, okay? You're going to get all of it. And also in the idea too around this, that reaching out to other people is central, right? This is where we reach out to recovery partners, and we don't reach out, in ACA, we don't reach out to heal someone else's wounded child. We reach out to, we attend to our own wounded child. And that is the practice. It's a very individualized practice. No one else can heal my wounded child in the ways that my loving parent needs to. At the same time, reaching out to someone else is essential because I need to help boost my loving parent part sometimes, right? And I need to reach out and I need to share that experience. And that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for with each other. And that's why this fellowship is here. And to acknowledge too, sometimes it takes something more than that. That we can't rely on fellow travelers for some of the really in-depth work maybe that needs to happen. And we might just find a PTSD trained therapist and things of that nature to help support and boost in ways that maybe fellow travelers aren't equipped to do. So a lot of powerful stuff here. I just really want to thank all of you for being here.